In Greek mythology, Icarus is the story of a boy who was able to fly with a pair of wings made from feathers and beeswax. And although they were only prosthetic, he became infatuated with the idea he could actually fly. But after flying too close to the sun, his wings caught fire and he perished. The story is a metaphor for someone who is too ambitious or too risk-seeking and ultimately faces the consequences. Anthony Ervin has faced these consequences, but the subject of his obsessions couldn't be more polarizing. His story is full of contrast, a quest for identity, and the most incredible Olympic comeback story you've never heard of. Anthony Lee Ervin was born in 1981 to parents of African American and Jewish descent. He grew up in Canoga Park, Los Angeles, where his parents had a pool in the back garden. He recalls his mother telling him as a kid he begged to be in the water, and it was an affinity that never left him. Call it a calling or destiny. He was born different. At 7 years old, his talent was on show straight away. He went to his first swim meet and cleared out the competition. He entered at a level C time standard, which is effectively no time, and leapfrogged to a double A standard in the same meet. Coaches and teammates started paying attention, and along with it, his inception of an identity in sport. A few years later, his parents moved to the suburbs, where Anthony attended Hart High School in Santa Clarita. But after a lull in performance, he became apathetic towards the sport and fundamentally fell out of love with swimming, a recurring theme throughout his career. The old flame was only rekindled during his senior year in high school. You can't deny talent when it's evident. Unsurprisingly, he was unmatched in local meets. He was fast, but he wasn't breaking any national age group records, and he wasn't being recruited by colleges. But in 1999, Mike Bottom, head coach at the University of California, Berkeley, saw something in Anthony that others didn't. Not just in sprinting talent, but in his rebellious nature, his resistance to conformity, and his ability to win on his own terms. He was prepared to find another way for Anthony, to make the sport accessible for him. By this point, Anthony had a reputation for being lazy and being unable to get up for morning sessions. By his own admission, he suffered with insomnia throughout his career. But Mike was a genius at managing the physical and psychological needs of his swimmers, and a bond was forged between the two. Anthony only saw swimming as a ticket into college. Despite his obvious talent, he hadn't even considered that he would end up being one of the most gifted sprinters of all time. He started to see meaningful results in his freshman year. During the dual meet season, he broke 20 seconds in the 50-yard freestyle short course. A rare feat at the time, and especially considering he was unshaven and untapered. But he still didn't aspire to be an Olympic swimmer, or even think it was a realistic idea at that point. Incredibly, it wasn't until he won the 50 freestyle at the Division I National College Championships that he thought he maybe had a chance. And that maybe is only because he won in a short course world record of 21.21. In the run-up to the 2000 Olympics, he trained with Gary Hall Jr., another notorious American sprinter with a rebellious streak of his own. Gary was already an Olympic champion from 1996, but despite his irrepressible poolside demeanour and notoriety outside of the sport, Anthony didn't even know who he was. The Atlanta Games coincided with his previous disillusionment from the sport, and he didn't bother watching them on TV. Going into the Olympic trials, Anthony targeted the 4x100 metre freestyle relay. He came 5th in the 100 metre individual, and thereby booking his ticket on the plane. Not that he even had a passport at that time. Later in the meet, he came 2nd in the 50 metre freestyle, further cementing his place on the Olympic squad. He knew he was going, and he believed that he already had one hand on the gold, but not in the 50. The United States had won the 4x100 metre freestyle relay ever since it was part of the Olympic programme. It was a given, a part of history already written ahead of time. But by the time he reached Australia, Anthony was about to swim in an iconic comeback race in its own right. Gary had set off a media frenzy after publicly saying the Americans would smash the Aussies like guitars. But in the final, in Sydney, against the roar of the raucous home crowds and an Australian quartet anchored by a 17-year-old Ian Thorpe, that pre-written history unravelled. In Anthony's lead-off leg, Michael Klim set a world record, and despite Gary Hall Jr. getting the Americans back in the lead by the 4th leg, the rambunctious sprinter was caught by the torpedo. As the Aussies played their guitars, celebrating the gold medal and a new world record, Anthony was devastated. That was his nailed-on gold medal, stolen in the last 2 strokes. But he still had the 50. He isolated himself from everyone and went over everything that could go wrong and dreamt about what could go right. He placed 4th in the heats, 3rd in the semi-finals, and seeded in the lane next to Gary Hall Jr. in the final, who by this point was doing his shadow boxing routine for the crowds. But after his disappointment in the relay, there was no more room for distraction in Anthony's mind. All he remembers is staring down the lane, and what followed was simply an execution of everything he had prepared for. A swimming performance that was free, but with ultimate self-control. And what had previously been a joke between the pair of them at training camp became a reality. They drew, embracing over the lane line to share the gold medal in a time of 21.98. Sprint swimming events tend to be won by older swimmers. Data from 1992 to 2012 shows the average age of Olympic champions in the 50 metre freestyle is 27 years old. At 19, Anthony was the youngest winner of the event ever, and effectively still a kid. All his goals realised, his Everest conquered, and a place in history at the pinnacle of the sport. He was thrust into the spotlight before his hair was even dry. After the race, he was interviewed on a live TV broadcast by sports journalist Jim Gray. And the first question he asked, "So, I noticed you twitching behind the blocks. Is that your Tourette's?" A secret Anthony had not even shared with his teammates, let alone the world. Tourette's is a neurological disorder that causes sudden, unwanted and uncontrolled, rapid and repeated movements or vocal sounds called tics. Eye fluttering was his primary symptom, which started presenting in junior high school. There was something about the effort of training and the accumulation of energy reserved for a big race that controlled his Tourette's. By using his nervous system to its maximum, it felt like these random surges of movement could be contained. Was it just a hunch? Or was it something more? British neurologist Oliver Sacks conducted experiments that proved there's actually a relationship between Tourette's, performance, and most importantly, speed. It could be that Anthony's sprinting ability was somehow related to his Tourette's, holding off the outburst of energy until it was time to race, the idea of supercompensation. After being blindsided into silence by the Tourette's question, Jim Gray swung again. What's it like to be black and win a gold medal? Anthony was the first ever American of African descent to win Olympic gold in the pool. It wasn't a question he was completely unprepared for, having a black father and being in a predominantly white sport. However, he wasn't interested in convincing any audience that being a black gold medalist in swimming was more important than just being a gold medalist. It wasn't a narrative he wanted to push. He wasn't expecting to win an individual gold medal, and he certainly didn't want to be the voice of African Americans. It was like Anthony was always looking over his shoulder at identity, and this glory raised a lot of questions. Who was Anthony Ervin? Who was the swimmer? Who was the person the media wanted him to be? And who was the person he wanted to be inside? These characters were always fighting against each other. He continued to compete for a few years after his early success, and in 2001 put together arguably his best ever meet at the World Championships in Fukuoka, Japan. He won the sprint double, taking first in the 50-metre freestyle and 100-metre freestyle, the latter being a championship record. He was swimming faster than ever, but in training, he was breaking more and more rules with regards to his protocol and attitude towards the sport. Inside, his enthusiasm for the sport and his relationship with his identity was becoming more toxic. The bright lights and blues of the pool had seeped out into a dark lake. After 2001, he was completely mentally checked out, and by 2003, he was all but retired at the age of 22. It broke his mother's heart, but he had no more goals left, and the distractions of self-destruction were way more appealing than the training required to be a swimmer at that level. And the temptation to be out of the spotlight for good was calling his name. He left LA and moved to Brooklyn simply by word of mouth to pursue a career in music. A fan of Rage Against the Machine, the Smashing Pumpkins, and the White Stripes, he taught himself how to play guitar to unpack some of the things he was feeling, and even formed a band with some of his friends called the Weapons of Mass Destruction. He was out of the mainstream and into the party scene in New York, but none of his friends had any idea he was an Olympic champion. He started going by Tony instead of Anthony to disguise his identity. He wanted to leave it all behind and never brought it up. He collected a gallery of tattoos on his body, something largely unseen on Olympic poolsides at the time. But that wasn't the only habit he started fostering. He started smoking cigarettes, drinking heavily, taking hallucinogens and OxyContin, not to mention cross-dressing and riding his motorcycle like a man possessed, all in an attempt to understand who he truly was. The self-disciplined athlete had become the self-destructive nihilist. That far separated from the sport he used to love, he famously sold his Olympic gold medal on eBay in 2005. He donated the $17,000 worth of earnings to the Red Cross Tsunami Relief Fund. He said, "I showed it at clinics I was doing and things like that, but it pretty much just sat in my closet." The silver medal he won in the relay also got lost on his travels. He wanted to pursue other things that as an athlete he'd had to turn down. He had committed so much to swimming, but during his hedonism, like Icarus, he flew too close to the sun and ended up trying to commit suicide. Thankfully, he didn't succeed. If you want the gory details, you can read his book, Chasing Water. His band soon fell apart, and Anthony was out of money, having to sell his possessions to fund his lifestyle. He couch surfed through Manhattan and Brooklyn, and after finding his glass ceiling, he decided to go back to college and back to the University of California. By 2010, he had earned a bachelor's degree in English and went on to study at the graduate school, where he got back into the water and smoked his last cigarette. In 2011, he started training with the masters and women's teams, and outside of training he started working with children, teaching them to swim and seeing the sport through a different lens. Along with his self-esteem, the raw speed started returning too. He swam in a series of Grand Prix meets in 2012, clocking a 22.27 50-metre free along the way in Austin. As that year's US Olympic trials got closer, he was favourite to make the Olympic team. So let it be written, so let it be done. 12 years after making his first Olympic team, Anthony made it to the London 2012 Olympics with a personal best of 21.60, only 100th of a second behind Cullen Jones, incidentally another black swimmer. At the London Games, Anthony placed a credible 5th in the final at age 31, and in the eyes of the swimming world, a comeback to be proud of. But he wasn't done yet. He'd only trained properly for 6 months leading up to the 2012 Games, and during the semi-finals of the 2013 World Championships, his time of 21.42 was another personal best, and the fastest non-tech suit time in American history. He was getting faster. 3 years later, he was back at the US Olympic trials and secured a place at his 3rd Olympics by finishing 4th in the 100-metre freestyle, making the same relay event he did back in 2000. In the 50-metre freestyle final, he was touched out by 100th of a second by Nathan Adrian, the same margin he was touched out by at the 2012 trials. Notwithstanding that, he put a second stamp on his ticket for Rio 2016, this time an individual event. At the Games, he started the week with the 4x100 metre freestyle relay, swimming for the United States in the heats. He had the fastest split time on the USA team to bring them home and qualify first for the final. Caleb Dressel, Ryan Held, Michael Phelps and Nathan Adrian went on to take gold in the final. Heat swimmers are still awarded medals if their teammates go on to podium. It's a certified gold, but as a heat swimmer, and in the eyes of many competitors, more of a token gesture, and not the gold medal an athlete truly wants. He'd played his part for the team, but now it was the 50-metre freestyle. He placed 3rd in the heats, and 3rd again in the semi-finals, getting faster in each round. So there he was, back where it all started. The memories of the 19-year-old boy with the world at his feet. A dream realised, which then became a secret, something he held deep inside of himself, but chose to forget. The anarchist, on a warpath of self-discovery and a battle of identity. Anthony talked about a comeback in the past. What if I don't make it back? Or make it back, but don't win a gold medal? I'll be totally okay with it. He had relinquished control and unlocked freedom in his life and in the water. He touched first in 21.40, a lifetime best, and just 1/100th of a second faster than the defending Olympic champion, Florent Manodou. At 35 years old, Anthony Ervin became the oldest ever Olympic champion in swimming. His second individual title coming 16 years after the first. The longest gap ever recorded between two Olympic swimming titles. He was also the first African American to win an Olympic gold in the pool, and is still the youngest ever Olympic 50-meter freestyle champion in history. Will there ever be another Anthony Ervin? Probably not. If you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe.